Hashem. Okay, well, let's begin. It's 10:02, and we are holding on Daf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph, page 23a, and we are holding. Let's see, towards the second half of the page. Almost at the bottom. We're like 3 lines up from the bottom of the page. That's where we are. Okay, so let's just go over what we learned yesterday. The Gemara that we learned yesterday had to do with of course, the discussion we've been talking about for a while, a moving sukkah. And that was sukkah on an animal, sukkah on a boat, sukkah on a wagon, sukkah on a wagon. We dealt with the issue of Rabbi Yehuda bringing a pasuk that says he can't have a sukkah on an animal. But we said, what do you mean? It's also moving. So why does he need a pasuk for it? And this was a problem. This was Tosfos's question. Tosfos was bothered with this. Could that be Rabbi Yehuda's view? Could Rabbi Yehuda really have a problem with the sukkah on a bed that's moving? But why does it, if that's not good, why does he need an extra pasuk over here? So we talked about that a little length, and the conclusion was that Tosfos came up with a scenario where a sukkah on a bed could be a problem with a moving, because it's a moving sukkah. But it's possible that a sukkah on an animal is not a problem of being a moving sukkah, because the schach could be a case where the roof, the schach, the branches are solidly established they're supported by another permanent structure, which is not a sukkah, but they're permanent. So the schach is permanent, and the sukkah is only the walls part. That's what's temporary. That's on the animal. But there's no schach on the animal. There's zero schach on the animal part, on the animal sukkah. It's that the animal is moving the walls into traveling with these walls, I'm getting that a ride in the back of with the animal. You're getting a ride in the back of the animal, and it has walls, some type of a structure there without any roof. And then it actually walks right into this permanent structure that has a schach on it. And there, you can't call the sukkah a moving sukkah. And what it ends up being is it's still not valid, but for a different reason. It's not valid because it's not fit for Shiva, for 7 days of Sukkot. And that was a verse that said the Sukkah has to be usable for the 7 days of Sukkot. Of course, here in America or outside of Israel, Sukkot is 8 days. We dwell in the Sukkah for 8 days. But the law in the Torah is that the Sukkah has to be usable for 7 days, because that's the biblical law. Sukkot is 7 days. And the Sukkah has to be fit for 7 days. The Rashi says the problem then with having a sukkah on top of an animal, Rashi says, is that it's the problem is the rabbis made a decree that you're not allowed to go on an animal on Yom Tov. And what's going to end up happening is you won't be able to use it L'Yom Rishon, on the first day of Sukkot. That's the way that's how Rashi mentions this issue. That the problem is the first day is Yom Tov. And someone asked, what about the 8th day is also Yom Tov? Shmini Atzeres is also Yom Tov. But that's not really a problem, because Shmini Atzeres, we're dealing with the official law in the Torah here, that the Shmini Atzeres in Israel, you don't dwell in the sukkah. So there's really only 1 day of Yom Tov in Israel, the sukkah has to be fit for 7 days. That's the pasuk. Chag HaSukkah is tasel shivas yamim. It only says 7 days, so it has to be fit for 7 days. One of those 7 days is Yom Tov. Which day? It's only the first day out of the 7. The Shmini Atzeres in Eretz Yisrael, you're not allowed. You're not supposed to sit in the sukkah, and we only sit in the sukkah here. It's part of the tradition because there was a speika de yoima. There was originally a question of what day was the right day, but basically the first day is the Yom Tov day. Now, what's interesting is that this is not as simple as it sounds. So let's think about what this case is. The case is that you have a sukkah. It's built on the back of an animal, meaning that there's a floor which is right on top of the back of the animal, some type of a board, probably roped around so that it's nice and sturdy. You have walls, and you have some type of schach, which we could learn like Taisvis, that the schach is really it's really a permanent schach. Okay, and yet the sukkah, the problem with the sukkah is not that it's movable, it's that you're climbing on top of an animal on Yom Tov. And climbing on top of an animal on Yom Tov is prohibited. It's also rabbinically. And Rabbi Yehuda says that the fact that you can't use it for all 7 days means that it's not going to be a valid sukkah. What do you mean? I could use it for Chol Hamoed. There's nothing wrong going on an animal. You go horseback riding on Chol Hamoed. Nothing wrong with playing with animals on Chol Hamoed. Why can't you? What's the problem with having a sukkah on top of the animal? The schach is sturdy, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, where the schach has to be sturdy. You could have a case where the schach is very sturdy because it's on a structure and the animal is just holding the walls and the floor, but the schach is actually permanent. So you could have a case. What will be the problem? The answer is no, but it's not fit for all 7 days. Your sukkah has to be fit for all 7 days. If it's not fit for all 7 days, it's not kosher. This is the problem. Now, Rameir argues on this. Rameir says, "What do you mean it's not fit for 7 days? Biblically, I'm allowed to go on the sukkah on the first day. It's only a rabbinic problem." But Rabbi Yehuda says it doesn't matter, even though it's a rabbinic problem. It would still be an issue because the fact is it's not usable. The fact is if it's not usable, it's not usable. It's not usable on the first day. Rameir would say no, it's usable biblically. It's usable. So the question is how far you take it. So what's interesting is what I just mentioned to you about Shmini Atzeres. You could then say, well, if Rabbi Yehuda says any rabbinic problem is a problem, so what about Shmini Atzeres is also rabbinic? So maybe it has to be fit for Shmini Atzeres also. What do you think?
No.
Tell me, rabbinic is an issue. You can't get out on the first day. Okay, so then Shmini Atzeres is also an issue. What do you think?
I don't think it's an issue.
Why?
Because the fact that you're even in the sukkah is only rabbinic. So you have rabbinic on rabbinic. You have like a double rabbinic. Two for one.
That's interesting. What do you think, Jeffrey? You have a different reason why it should be okay?
It's but the Gemara says that's a different holiday. We call it a different holiday. So if you happen to be sitting there because of the calendar tradition, that doesn't mean you're not saying the bracha, and you're also calling the day and saying Kiddush with a different name.
Okay, but still, the halacha is that you are obligated to dwell in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. That's the halacha. It's a rabbinic halacha. It's rabbinically obligated. Both in the olden days and even today, it became a accepted tradition.
Practice.
That it's a practice, that it's, even though we know what day is the right. So originally it was a sfeika diyoma, it was a questionable thing, but that would obligate us, at least rabbinically, to be strict. And now it's a rabbinic decree. So do we have to take into consideration Shmini Atzeres is also a day of Yom Tov, and your sukkah has to be valid for 8 days, maybe. In other words, does your sukkah have to, outside of Israel, I'll give you a very practical case. You have schach on your sukkah, and the schach over time does get smaller, and it dries up. It withers and dries. It gets smaller. And so your schach needs to originally be sufficient for the entire sukkah. So the question would be, if you live in Israel, how many days does your schach have to be sufficient to give shade? And give majority shade, or however much shade we need to make it a kosher sukkah. In Israel, you need 7 days. So my question is, would outside of Israel, where sukkah is basically 8, we're obligated to dwell in the sukkah for 8 days, would you now be obligated to have schach that's sufficient for 8 days? This is a very practical halacha. Or is it enough that it's sufficient for 7 days? It would seem like it's based on this halacha. We're talking in our Gemara about the 7 days because that it has to be usable on Yom Tov and so on for an animal, because on an animal, and so that's a interesting case. But my case is more of a very practical case because it's hard to get schach. It costs money, and your sukkah, you don't want to put too much schach on it, in addition to the fact that it's very heavy. So and the sun beats down on it. So the question would be, one more day could be a difference of it being a kosher sukkah or not. So does our schach need to be valid? You know that it's not going to be, or might not be, kosher for the 8th day of Shmini Atzeres, and you don't really care because you're going away. But the question is, would your sukkah be kosher the first 7 days? Or the fact that it's not going to be sufficient for the 8th day, would that be a problem? So this is an interesting question. I didn't really look into it, but it's connected to this Gemara because Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that we do take into consideration rabbinic laws, and the fact that rabbinically you can't go into the sukkah on the first day. That means that it's not valid for 7 days. So the question would be, would we have to take Shmini Atzeres into consideration if you live outside of Israel? Now, the thing that I think is that we don't have to. I might be wrong, but I'm just guessing that maybe you don't have to. I'll tell you what I'm thinking is the pasuk that tells us this whole law that it has to be valid, for Sukkot, is a pasuk that clearly says 7 days.
Yeah.
So would the rabbis have added, when they added a law that you have to dwell in the sukkah on the 8th day, does they also add the law that the sukkah has to be valid, throughout the sukkahs for the 8th day? I doubt it. I don't know. To me, that would sound surprising. So the pasuk tells us only about that the sukkah has to be a valid sukkah for 8 days. So I would think that even if your sukkah is not going to be valid on Shmini Atzeres, maybe it still should be kosher. I have to look it up and see if they talk about this scenario in Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, yes.
In Israel, there is no requirement to sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeret.
You're not allowed to, right? You're not even allowed to. Yeah.
Okay, so there's the rabbinical pronouncements are only for chutz la'aretz, not for Eretz Yisrael.
Okay, but what about outside of? Yeah. What about here? Would you be obligated to have sufficient schach that it'll last even for Shmini Atzeres?
And the answer would probably be yes, because of Safek Diyoma, as to whether
okay,
day or not day.
And you might be right. I don't know. I'm actually not sure. That could be okay. So you think that it should be sufficient for 8 days? The schach has to be schach that will last for 8 days. That could be okay. I accept that it's possible, and I would say maybe the reason also could be that the rabbis decrees similar to the biblical laws. So if the biblical law obligates you to be sufficient for all the days of Sukkot, you could say maybe the rabbis, when they added that day and said we have to be machmir on the 8th day, that it's a sveika diyama, we accepted it, and it became when the rabbis made it takana, they kein da'araisa. So yeah, possible. That's another way of looking at it, that you would be obligated. It has to be sufficient for 8 days. Yes, Victor.
So what if, let's say somebody went on the first days, they went away, and they didn't have time to finish their sukkah. They come back, Chol Hamoed, and then the guy goes to put the stach on. Now it's the third day of whatever Chol Hamoed. That means he has no sukkah. It doesn't exist, this sukkah, or
No,
what?
no. It has to be sufficient for the full sukkahs. It has to be sufficient for the. So it would seem that. So in other words, what you're asking is not if it's a kosher sukkah. That for sure it could be kosher. The question would be: would you need 7 days worth of schach on it, or would 4 days left, since there's only 4 days left of sukkahs, or 5 days left of sukkahs? Would it be good enough if he has 5 days worth of schach on it? Yeah, that's an interesting, but it would seem like it's sufficient for this sukkahs. For this year, that's what it would seem, that the obligation is for the 7 days of sukkahs. Your schach has to last till the end of the 7 days of sukkahs. That's what it would seem like. So I would think that 5 days would be sufficient. Again, we're going to look up these cases, and we'll have to look it up in Shulchan Aruch and just see.
All right.
Yes, Jeffrey.
I have the same problem with the lulav,
What do you mean?
that it doesn't always last. The leaves don't always last. They get dry even
Right.
because you don't buy it always the hour before sukkahs.
Yeah, there is a minhag that some people specifically change the aravos during sukkahs, because the aravos often do dry up, and some have a minhag. I always make sure to buy extra aravos. I keep them in my refrigerator, and throughout sukkahs I change them sometimes twice. But especially because my lulav gets used throughout the day, so it really gets dried up. But yeah, definitely that's definitely an issue.
I remember when a shul only had 2 lulavim. So,
Right.
so
Right.
That
Oh.
depends. That
Yeah.
depends. That depends on how you put your Abba Minim together. If you do it the way the Sephardim do, and I think the Minhag Chabad is the same thing, that you tie it on to the
Lulav itself.
lulav itself, then it becomes a little bit more difficult to keep the avot fresh and moist. So you have to shave it. In the Minhag Ashkenaz, the fact that you can remove the entire holder and you can you can put it and bind it in such a way that it keeps the moisture in, etc. I use that method, and I've never had to change the ayavot at all. Mine have always been fresh till the very end. But I do the
That's
same
right.
thing, which is I buy an extra set and I keep it in the refrigerator in case it doesn't last.
Right.
It all depends on the minhag as to whether it remains fresh or not.
So Ezra, when I had the lulav, the Sephardi way, but I put the whole lulav in the refrigerator.
In the refrigerator?
I'm glad
Yeah,
you
well,
have,
yeah,
I'm
a
glad you
long,
have
a
a
long
big
enough
refrigerator
shelf.
can do that. Not everybody has a big
You need
refrigerator.
a long enough shelf that you can fit it in, but put the whole thing in. But it wasn't one of those extra long ones, just average, whatever, average size. Not like that.
Rabbi?
The truth is there you would be allowed to snip your lulav shorter, as long as you know the measurements that it needs to be. You could actually make your lulav shorter, not on the top, but on the bottom. You can cut off a lot of the bottom sometimes, and then you could actually have a shorter lulav.
That I did when I put it in my suitcase when we went from Mexico to Texas. My son and I, we cut it from the bottom enough that it was still kosher, and we put it in the suitcase and then made it through.
Right. Yes, Moshe.
The Eravos, that when you slap it on the ground, at the end of Chol Hamoed, is that a custom by the Sephardim as well as the Ashkenazim? I'm just curious.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so getting back to what we were talking about, so we mentioned that Rashi says the problem that Reb Yehuda has with this sukkah that's on top of an animal is that on the first day of Sukkot, it's Yom Tov in Israel. And the second day of Sukkot outside of Israel is Yom Tov. But the first day, and even in Israel, is Yom Tov, and you can't go on it on Yom Tov, and therefore it's not a sukkah that's valid for 7 days. Now, the problem with Rashi is, what would happen if you only have this sukkah to eat in? It's the first day of Sukkot. It's on top of an animal. Would you be allowed to go into this sukkah on the first night? So there's a chiyuv, there's a major obligation to eat in the sukkah the first night. The other days of Sukkot, you could be lenient. You don't have to eat bread, or you could, get away without eating. But the night of the first night is a mitzvah, a biblical mitzvah to eat in the sukkah. And the poskim mention that seemingly you would be obligated to go on top of this transgress this rabbinic law of not going on an animal in order to fulfill the mitzvah of eating in a sukkah. So is the sukkah usable on the first night? Yes. So Rashi says the problem is it's not usable for 7 days because you can't go on it on the first. You can't go on Yom Tov. You could go in on Yom Tov. It's usable. You could go on it. You don't have another option. And the rabbis didn't make their decree, so you're not really transgressing the law. The rabbis didn't make their decree in a case against a biblical law of eating your suda in the sukkah. So that's one thing. Additionally, there's another issue. The other issue is that we know that you're allowed to you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. You're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. Why? It's called Eichel Nefesh. In order to, you're allowed to do work on Yom Tov that involves food. That's why you can spread fire and there's no Isser Bishul, there's no prohibition of cook. Shabbos, you're not allowed to cook. But Yom Tov, you could cook. You just have to have a fire. You can't make a fire from scratch. You have to use a fire that's already existing, but you could actually cook on Yom Tov. You could take something uncooked that's raw, and you could cook it on Yom Tov. So would you be allowed on Yom Tov to go on this animal inside your sukkah in order to eat your Yom Tov meal? That's Eichel Nefesh. So maybe again number one, you have a mitzvah to eat the Seudas Yom Tov. The night meal for sure is a biblical obligation. We have a limud, we have a Gzera Shavah. There's a limud that it has to be, you have to eat a meal for the night of Sukkot. Additionally, it's called Eichel Nefesh. Eichel Nefesh that you need, in order for food, you're allowed to cook and you're allowed to do things. So you would be as well allowed to go onto this animal on Yom Tov. So again, we see that the sukkah on the animal is usable on Yom Tov. So what comes out? Is it a usable sukkah for 7 days? It should be. It should be seemingly usable for 7 days. So would that be a problem? Would that be a problem to explain the Gemara this way? That Rashi, the way Rashi explains it. So other Rishonim do say that the problem is not about Yom Tov, that the sukkah is not valid on Yom Tov. They say the problem is the sukkah is not valid on Shabbos. That the Shabbos is going to be the problem, not the Yom Tov, because any sukkah always has a Shabbos. You can't go 7 days without Shabbos. One of those 7 days is definitely a Shabbos. And so when it says that the sukkah is not valid for 7 days, when you to go on this animal, it's not telling you about the first day Yom Tov. Some of the Rishonim want to learn it's a problem. The problem is Shabbos you can't get on the animal because you don't have the heter of, oh, it's the first night of Sukkot, I have to eat in the sukkah, I have a mitzvah. No, you can't go on the animal on Shabbos, and you don't have the heter of Eichel Nefesh.
What about if the first day is Shabbat?
Right. So if the first night and day is Shabbos,
So
and you're going to say
the first night you have an obligation
to eat it. So you want to tell me that not only maybe that
I'm
would
not
that
telling you anything, Rabbi. I'm just asking a simple question.
Yeah, no. So what comes out is you could maybe say that you could eat it, transgress the. Would you be allowed to eat it if it's Shabbat, if it's Yom Tov? So you'll say, well, there's a mitzvah to eat the first night is a biblical mitzvah. So the rabbi's decree of not going on an animal on Yom Tov, maybe you say the same thing with Shabbos, right? So it really answers the answer of the Rishonim really answers the second problem, not really
Rabbi,
the first.
you lose the Ochel Nefesh part. You lose that
Nefesh is what you lose. That's or you gain, I should say. You gain that.
You lose it on if it's Friday night is
right.
Shabbat and
Shabbos,
Sukkot, first night of Sukkot. Now you don't have it. You can't add that in as a.
And we have a precedent.
Well, so in other words, what they're really answering, I guess the point is that if the first day doesn't fall on Shabbos, that's when the case that's when this case would be applicable. In a case where it actually fell on Shabbos, so I guess this does answer both problems in general, not every single year. Ezra came up with a case where actually, the Gemara's statement doesn't always work. In a year that Shabbos falls on the first night, the first day is Shabbos, then it's not a problem that your sukkah, you can't say the sukkah is not valid for 7 days because it will be valid. But on a regular year, it won't be valid for 7 days. And Rabbi Yehuda would say it's invalid. But there would be a case where it actually would be valid if the first night fell on Shabbos. Then that year the sukkah would actually be valid. So Ezra came up with a case where it actually would work. But in the regular case, you could still explain the Gemara this way. In other words, Rashi's pshat is problematic according to these commentaries, because Rashi's explanation, it never is a problem to dwell in the sukkah for 7 days because it's Yom Tov, you would be allowed to go into the sukkah. If you have no other sukkah, you can go in the sukkah. You're able to go in the sukkah, and therefore it's a sukkah that's valid for 7 days. Why? It's on an animal? Okay, it's on an animal. But I have a mitzvah to eat in the sukkah, and I have oichel nefesh, it's food on Yom Tov. I'm allowed to transgress this rabbinic decree of not going on an animal in order to eat. So basically, is it valid for 7 days, the sukkah? Yeah, it's valid for 7 days. So what does the Gemara mean? It's not valid for 7 days. So these Rishonim learn, no, but it's talking about the Shabbos, one of the days of the 7 days is Shabbos. Well, it's not going to be valid to go on the sukkah, to go in the sukkah on Shabbos. And therefore, is this a sukkah that's valid for 7 days? No, because Shabbos you won't be allowed to. You have no heter. Number one, you can't. There's no heter to go up because there's a mitzvah d'oraisa to eat in the sukkah. No, you wouldn't be allowed to transgress the Shabbos law. And number two, you wouldn't be allowed to say oichel nefesh. I'm allowed to transgress the rabbinic law because of oichel nefesh. So you wouldn't be able to get out of it. Now, if the first day fell on Shabbos, maybe you would be able to get out of it. So that would be in such a year, you could say the sukkah would be valid. But in a regular year, it won't be valid. Yes, Jeffrey.
But we see that the Torah says, certainly it's a biblical law, that you have to use a lulav on the first day. And we don't use the lulav on the first day.
Right.
When it's Shabbos, because of rabbinical law, I think happened in Babylon, when we were in Bavel, and they said the same thing about the Megillah and the same thing about the shofar.
Yeah, but there's a difference. Let me just explain to you. There is a difference. When the rabbis tell you straight out that you have a biblical law and we're telling you not to do it, that's okay. But when they tell you one law and it ends up being a problem for a different biblical law, that's another story. In other words, the rabbis didn't say the first night of Sukkot is falling on Shabbos, and you are not allowed to go into your sukkah if it's on top of an animal. The rabbis didn't say that. They didn't say don't go, because if they did say that, then you actually wouldn't be allowed to go, like you're saying, similar to Shabbos and Yom. You know, when Shabbos falls on Rosh Hashanah, first day falls on Shabbos, you can't blow shofar. The rabbi said don't blow shofar. Oh, I have a biblical mitzvah. It overrides a rabbinic decree. No, it doesn't override this. The rabbis told you straight out, don't do it now. So you're going to say, oh, but I have a mitzvah of biblical. I'm not listening to you, rabbi. The rabbi said specifically about your case that you shouldn't be blowing shofar. So you have to listen to the rabbis in that scenario. But in a case where they mentioned a certain rule, and now comes another scenario where it's Shabbos, it falls out and it hands up that you have a problem with the rabbinic decree. So there is a concept that the rabbis didn't enforce their law when there's a biblical mitzvah that's overriding it. There is such a concept, and therefore there's reason to say that that on Yom Tov you would be allowed to eat in this sukkah that's on top of an animal. So again, we're mentioning the other Rishonim, the other Rishonim that talk about
Rabbi,
this issue that Rashi brings up, and they disagree with it. Now the question is what Rashi really holds. Why does Rashi understand that his pshat is correct, that it's Yom Tov? Wouldn't you be allowed to eat in the sukkah on these days of Yom Tov? That would be a good question to try to figure out what Rashi really holds. Does Rashi hold a difference in halacha, or does he hold that because if you do have another sukkah, you would not be allowed to use this, so therefore it's called a sukkah that's not fit for 7 days. In other words, it's not an automatic that this is a sukkah that's valid for 7 days. So you really have to think about, have to go into what Rashi really holds and maybe see what he holds in other scenarios. Yes, Ezra.
How about originally, in the Beit HaMikdash, they did take the lulav, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the rabbis instituted the fact that we would take the lulav as a remembrance of what was done in the Beit HaMikdash. So that's a rabbinical decree. So they can make a decree saying that you can't use it on Shabbat because of the fact that they already created this rabbinical decree that to use it as a remembrance of what was being done in the Beit HaMikdash.
Well, the thing is, the first day is not a remembrance. First day is a l'kachtem lachem b'yom harishon. That is, the other days of Sukkot is a remembrance. The first day is a biblical decree, just like blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah. The first day of Rosh Hashanah is a biblical decree. It's to blow skatim, you have to blow the shofar. So that there's a biblical obligation to hear shofar on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. So and the rabbis still said that if it falls on Shabbos, we don't. But really, you should. But the rabbis have the right. It's called the Chachamim Yesh Koyach Biad Chachamim. They have the koyach to be mevatel a mitzvah b'shei v'yal tasem. They're not telling you to physically do something. They're telling you to sit back and don't do anything. The Chachamim have the ability to make such a decree because they're nervous that you're going to transgress a worse sin. So therefore, they have the ability to say, don't do that mitzvah.
Okay.
So even though it's biblical, it's interesting because it is talked about a lot in Hasidic writings. How could the Chachamim do such a thing? And even if they have the power to do it, just because they're nervous, someone's gonna go and carry it. Who's gonna carry it in the Rosh Hashanah? Someone someone who doesn't know, and how you gonna transgress? You're gonna make the whole Jewish people not do a mitzvah just because if someone's gonna make a little mistake? Would that be a good enough reason that all don't blow shofar and all don't shake lulav, and all because of this someone who's not
It's not
go
the
to
first
yeshiva?
time.
What?
Wow.
Not the first time that they've done that.
Right. But it's a question that's discussed in Hasidic writings. Like, how could the Chachamim think, even though they're allowed to? It's not that the Chachamim, they don't have the power to. They do. They have the power to do that. But does it make sense that they should have, that would have, what is their logic? What were they thinking when they made this decree? So in Hasidic writings, it comes up with a interesting logic that that really Shabbos, it really includes all of the powerful elements of shofar and lulav. Somehow the holiness of Shabbos has that element in it. So it's not that they're causing you to lose out in the shofar or in the lulav. It really has such an element in it that's like shofar and like lulav. It reaches the same heights that shofar does and that lulav does. And so they're not really causing you to lose out in everything that shofar stands for and everything that lulav stands for. However, in the Beis Hamikdash, it was even greater. It was even greater than Shabbos. In other words, the level of shofar, these in Yonim in the base, and therefore in the Beis Hamikdash, they would actually blow it even Shabbos. But they would sheitel. But outside of the Beis Hamikdash, the level that we blow shofar, shake lulav, that is the same level of Shabbos. Shabbos can encompasses such a holiness. Yes, Victor.
So I've heard from the rabbis here that the whole thing of Rosh Hashanah is that everything's on the scale. And so this one remote possible 1 in a million guy who's going to accidentally carry the shofar is enough that could tip the scale, that it's going to affect the whole din for the whole, for the whole world. That's also
that's
one
the
of
reason.
one of the reasons.
But guess what?
Yeah.
But now that the rabbis stopped everyone else from hearing the shofar, so they removed all of those million mitzvahs on one side because one sin on the other side. There's a million people could have heard the shofar. I don't know if the answer is so solid. You know what I mean?
Rabbi, but you don't know what the worth is of that one Averah in comparison to the one mitzvah of hearing the shofar.
Right.
You can't say, how could it be that a million of this is equivalent or is taken out, and so that this one person doesn't do it, and it's not one person.
Right.
I mean, when you look at it, what's the percentage of religious Jews in comparison to the entire Jewish population? Is it 1.5%? So we're talking about 98.5% versus the 1.5%. It's not just there's a lot more involved than just
right.
a million.
Okay.
This is one.
Oh, okay. I mean, I still think you could ask the question not as a definite, not as as if we know the value, but just it seems surprising to say that. It does seem surprising that a million mitzvahs would be, but you're right. We don't know for sure the value. You're right. So in any event, getting back to our Gemara here. So we were talking about the opinion of Reb Yehuda that says that a sukkah on top of an animal is has to be fit for 7 days, and so Reb Yehuda says for some reason, either because Yom Tov is not going to be usable or Shabbos is not, so this sukkah won't be usable one of those days. It's not going to be valid for any of the days of Sukkot. Now, and so what comes out is that our Mishnah that said if you make a sukkah on top of a gomel, it's kashera, it's kosher. Ve'ein oilen la b'yom tov, and you can't go up on it on Yom Tov. How could the Mishnah say such a thing? If you look in page 22b, the Mishnah says it is kosher. A sukkah on top of a gomel, on top of a camel, it's kosher, and you can't go on it on Yom Tov. What does that mean? How could the Mishnah say such a thing? You can't go up it on, can't go on it on Yom Tov. Or you can, but it's still kosher the rest of the days. It's not fit for 7 days. Well, how does that fit with the Mishnah?
You're asking us the question.
What is that?
You're asking us the question. Is that
Yeah,
what
I'm asking you the question. Anyone know how does that fit with the Mishnah? We just
I
had a whole
thought,
discussion.
Rabbi, you already explained it, that 7 days, the 7th day is because it's only rabbinic. It's not a
No, what do you mean? 7 days is rabbinic. One of the days is
no. The fact that whatever you would need to do to go on the animal is rabbinic, so therefore it makes the sukkah kosher.
no, but one of those days is
Prohibition
Shabbos.
of going on the animal is what is
Yeah,
rabbinic.
no, but one
so
of the days is
therefore,
Mishnar Shabbos. If you want to say the Yom Tov issue, then you have the Shabbos. The Gemara clearly says that there's a problem here. Rabbi Yehuda says you can't go on it any days of Sukkot, and the reason is because of 7 days, because it's not fit for 7 days.
assuming that Shabbat is not the first day?
Right. Okay. Fine. Okay. But still, I mean, the Mishnah says clearly you can't go on it on Yom Tov. So it seems to be talking about a case where you're not going to have the heter. You can't go on it on Yom Tov. Means you have an extra sukkah. Maybe you have some. You don't have this leniency that I mentioned. There is a leniency sometimes to go on the sukkah on Yom Tov. But here the Mishnah says you can't go on it. Why don't you have that leniency? Maybe you have another sukkah. You don't have any need. You're full. You're not gonna. But the fact is, it's a kosher sukkah. The rest of the sukkahs, it's a kosher sukkah, and there's no problem. What do you mean? We just mentioned that on sukkahs, if it's not fit for 7 days, it's a problem. So the answer is that this Mishnah doesn't go like Rabbi Yehuda, it goes like Rabbi Meir. We mentioned Rabbi Yehuda's view when the Gemara says, who does our Mishnah go like? It says it goes like Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir holds that there's no problem in this scenario, because Reb Meir holds that like Victor was saying, that midaraisa you're able to go on the sukkah, but what are you going to do now with Shabbos? Midaraisa you're able to go, so what are you going to do with Shabbos? So again, the answer the Gemara gives is that it's Reb Meir. Reb Meir holds it's not a problem. But what about Shabbos? How is it fit for 7 days? It's fit because it's only rabbinic. Oh, but Shabbos is also rabbinic, right? Shabbos is also only rabbinic. They're not to go on an animal. Okay. So actually, what Victor said was right. I just wanted to hear Reb Meir. I wanted you to say that it's Reb Meir. That the Mishnah doesn't go like Reb Yehuda. Reb Yehuda takes into consideration even rabbinic problems. Reb Meir says, no, only if it was a biblical problem to go on the sukkah, it's a problem. And therefore, the Gemara says that our Mishnah fits like Reb Meir, doesn't fit with Reb Yehuda. So we have two opinions here, and our Mishnah does not fit with what we were talking about. We were talking about Reb Yehuda's view, and even in Reb Yehuda's view, that's only rabbinic. We even had leniencies that it's not a problem, even rabbinically. And on that, we said, but Shabbos would be a problem. Or the Rashi seems to learn even Yom Tov is a problem, even though it's rabbinic. Okay, so maybe Rashi is learning that way because the Gemara seems to be talking about a case where you're not going to have the leniency of the Gemara is talking about a case where the Mishnah clearly says Ein Oilin La B'Yom Tov. So maybe because of that, Rashi learns that it could be talking about even a case of Yom Tov, and because we're talking about a case where you don't have such an issue of you have to eat on the first night. Maybe you ate already on the first night and still, or you have another sukkah that you're going to be able to use. So it's not like you need to use this on sukkahs. What do you mean ain't oil Yom Tov? You really could go up it on you could go on it on Yom Tov because you don't have another sukkah. No, you have another sukkah. We see the Mishnah talking about a case where you have another sukkah, another option, and still it says ain't oil Yom Tov. Or the question would be maybe Rashi understands that even if you would have a biblical obligation, maybe you wouldn't be allowed to. Maybe that I have to look up in Shulchan Aruch how if there is a discussion about that or everyone agrees. What would happen if you don't have another option? Does everyone agree that you go on the sukkah and transgress the rabbinic decree, or is there a discussion about that? So that would be something to look into. Okay, so getting back to the Gemara here. Also, so then the Gemara talked about a case where you made the animal into a wall for the sukkah. The animal is a wall, and this was a whole topic of discussion. We spoke about a elephant, and we spoke about all these different halachas. We had the halacha of we have an argument basically. If you made the animal a wall, and so we have Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. Yehuda says the animal would be kosher as a wall. Now, Tosfos comes here and says, by the way, make sure that you're not leaning the sukkah on the animal, because then it would be just like the case of the bed where the sukkah is movable. So you'll have that problem, at least according to the way Rashi learned. So Tosfos says it must be talking about that the sukkah is just the wall, but it's not that the sukkah is leaning on this wall. The schach is not leaning on the wall, so on. Okay, so you have the sukkah, the animal is this wall. Reb Meir says it's puzzle, and you can't have an animal as a wall. Reb Yehuda says, what's the problem? There's no issue. And the Gemara has to go through why does Reb Meir say it's a problem? Does anyone remember what Reb Meir says? Well, what could be a problem? Having an animal as a wall? The animal, why can't the animal? The animal is there. What? Anyone remember what we said? Yeah, Victor.
Well, they said either the animal's gonna die, and it'll if it's too short, the wall won't be high enough, or the animal will walk away.
Right.
And you won't have your wall.
Right. So we had it's either Shema Thomas, Abaye's reason, or Reb Zera was Shema Tivrach. Maybe it'll run away. Thank you, Victor. So that was what the Gemara said, and then the Gemara discussed the case. What would be a difference between these two opinions? And we spoke about cases of an elephant. So we had if you have an elephant and it's tied, so even if it dies, it's still going to be sufficient to be a wall. It's still tall enough. So even if it dies and falls down, it's not a problem. And it's tied, so it can't run away. So in that case, everyone would agree that it would actually be a kosher sukkah. So even though Reb Meir says you can't use an animal as a wall, but Reb Meir would agree that this would be kosher. There are cases where an animal would be kosher. If you tie down an elephant, that would be kosher because you don't have the problems. Reb Meir is talking about in specific scenarios, but not every. There are individual cases where it might be kosher. Like, for example, an animal that's tied down. Even Reb Meir will agree with Reb Yehuda that it's kosher. So could animal be kosher for sukkah, for a wall? Yes. What would be a case? An animal that's elephant that's tied down. That would be a case where it would be kosher. Even Reb Meir would agree. Now, what about a case of an elephant that's not tied? So the Gemara initially wants to say that you're not afraid that it'll die, but you are afraid that it could run away. But then the Gemara says, isn't the one who says you're afraid it's going to die, it could also run away? He also is afraid that it could run away. So how could he permit such a wall? It might run away. So Reb Meir, it turns out that in the case of an elephant, that would not be that if it's not tied, everyone agrees that that's not kosher according to Reb Meir. So what does the Gemara come up with? It comes up with another scenario. You have an animal that's tied, that you have an animal that's not an elephant that's tied down, and so you have an issue that it might die. If it dies, then it's not going to be a good wall. And if you're afraid that it might run away, the animal's tied down and can't run away. So that would be a case of a difference between these two opinions. Now, and the Gemara mentions that, well, what do you mean? It can't run away, okay, but even the opinion that says the problem is running away, maybe it's going to die. Why isn't he afraid of dying? So the Gemara answers that he's not afraid of Misa. Misa is not shriach. It's not common. How often is it going to happen that animals just die when they're in the middle of being a wall for a sukkah? You know, it's not common enough. So therefore, he says we don't have to worry that it's going to die. Run away, it happens all the time. But the animal dying, it's not necessary. Why should we be so afraid of, so concerned? So that's where we got up to. We're on page 23a, and we are 3 lines from the bottom. So the Gemara asks a question: isn't there space, the beini that's in between the legs of the animal, and so it's not going to be a kosher wall? So even when it's alive, it's not going to be. Even when it's alive, it's going to have this empty space. So what does the Gemara answer? The abed lay bahutza v'dafna, that you filled it with some type of hutza are the leaves of palm leaves, and daphna is branches. So you filled it up.
Laurel leaves in the translation I have here.
But I'm just translating with Rashi. Rashi says lulav dekel.
Okay.
Dekel is a palm tree, and the lulav are the branches. The leaves are branches of the palm tree, and the daphne is anfe apes. Oh, he does say lur. What was the word you said?
Laurel leaves.
Laura.
Laurel.
Is that
Laurel with an L at the end.
Yeah. What type of tree is that?
That's like
we have them even in America.
yeah.
Yeah, we have laurel trees. They have very nice smell. But the word is Greek.
Oh, okay. So Rashi says the word laurier. So I guess that's how they get that. That it must
laurier. You have to read that laurier.
Probably the old French.
Laurier.
That's
excuse my French.
The old French word probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tree names, and all trees have this ending.
Rashi says that it has a fruit called a bayish. Is the laurel fruit? Does this tree have fruits that you're mentioning? It does.
Yeah, the small. It's not fruit
berries or something.
Yeah,
it's like a little berry, I think, right? Yeah.
A pre. Rashi says it has some type of berry or something. Okay. So, anyways, so you filled it with these type of branches, and basically, it's considered a kosher sukkah. So the Gemara says, "Aren't you nervous, Dilma Rava? Aren't you nervous that maybe it's going to crouch down, and then it won't be sufficient to be 10 handbreadths tall?" And the Gemara answers, "The Masicha ba'ashle milael." And the Gemara answers that you pulled it. It's being held up. It's being stretched with ropes above, and therefore it can't crouch down below. And therefore it's going to be kosher. Therefore it would be a kosher. It would be a kosher animal, and you only have to worry. You only have to worry if it wasn't tied. If it was tied, you don't have these issues. Now the Gemara asks, what about the issue of Shema Ulaman da Amar Gzera Shema Tomos Nami Hamasicha Ba'ashli Milael? So the Gemara just said that we have a case where one opinion would say it's kosher, and one opinion would say it's not kosher. What were the cases? The case where one opinion says it's kosher according to Reb Meir, and the other opinion would say according to Reb Meir it's not kosher, is a case where you have an animal, it's not an elephant, it's not so big, and it's tied down. And we said that we're afraid it's going to die, but we're not afraid it's going to run away. Why aren't you afraid it's going to run away? It's tied. You're afraid it's going to die, then it would be a problem because the sukkah will no longer have that wall that it needs. It's obviously one of the first three walls. The fourth wall is no problem, but it probably doesn't have a fourth wall in the sukkah, and you only have three walls, and this is one of the necessary walls. And if it dies, it's gonna be a problem. So there you have a difference between Abaye and Reb Zera. Abaye is nervous that it's gonna die, so Abaye would say that Reb Meir would hold it's not kosher because they're afraid it's gonna die. It might die. But the Gemara now just said that in the case where that since we're not afraid of crouching, so the Gemara asks, you're not afraid that the animal will crouch down, so then it can't, even if it dies, it's going to be held up. So it's going to be held up even if it dies. So why is Abaye nervous that it's going to die? Even if it dies, the animal is still in one place. So the Gemara says, Zimnin demoikim. Bepachos mishloisha, samach leschach. Sometimes the animal its height is gonna be less than 3 handbreadths near the schach, and it'll be kosher as considered like a wall, because if it's within 3 handbreadths, it would actually be a kosher wall. And the truth is, it is held up by these ropes, and it can't crouch down. But when it dies, it actually contracts a little. And even though it's held up, the space that you were relying on, that it was less than 3 handbreadths, it no longer will have that sufficient. It will not have, not sufficient. It will have too much space. It'll have 3 handbreadths or more, and you won't be able to rely on this law. We just turned to page 23b. You won't be able to rely on the law of Lavid. So v'kivan demaisa kavtza, since it dies, it contracts. In Balav adaite, and you're not gonna realize that there's this slight difference from the way it was when it was alive and the way it is now that it's dead. And you're going to end up eating in the sukkah, and it's not going to be a kosher sukkah because it doesn't have 3 walls. So therefore, Reb Meir would hold that this is not a kosher sukkah according to Abaye. Why not? Because it might die and it won't be sufficient, even though it's held up high. It's held up to its height, but still it's going to get a little smaller, and it won't be enough to make a 10 handbreadth wall, and it'll ultimately be invalid as a sukkah, and therefore Reb Meir says you're not allowed to use it. Don't use an animal as a wall. Okay, we're going to stop here.
Rabbi,
Rabbi, thank you.
My question is very simple. Why do they assume that the ropes are going to be that strong that they'll be able to hold up an animal that dies? We're talking about a pachyderm, and he weighs a lot. We're not talking about, the rope, unless it's, one of these kind of ropes that they use to hold, for the ships that we see nowadays, to hold them in place. I don't think that individuals who had pachyderms would have ropes that are that wide to hold it in place. So, that to me is a case that I don't think would have been something that should have been considered.
Right. So I guess the reason why they would do things with animals, they were very limited. Again, they didn't have Home Depots then. And it seems surprising that you're going to have an animal like that for 7 days. That's another question that should be asked. Can an animal stay like that for a long time? I wonder, how or maybe it's only maybe it is only a temporary wall until your wall gets delivered. Would that be the case? But for whatever reason, they seem to have had methods of keeping things in order exactly how they needed it to be. So they must have had ropes. I don't know if this was an old animal. Maybe it wasn't so strong on its own, so it wasn't gonna it's not running away. It has it is what it is. It could be a scenario where they're different types of animals. Some animals are whatever it is. They had ropes that would be sufficient for this type of animal. But you're right. I don't know we don't live in that type of society to know the practical side of these things. But I guess it has something to do with the fact that in those days they didn't have everything available like we have. Yes, Jeffrey.
I think a lot of this part of the discussion has to do with the Roman period, when people were running away, people were persecuted, people were very restricted. We saw the question we had in the first period, where the people were gathered on a porch so that it wouldn't look like they were in a sukkah. Right? And could they have some leniencies about using the schach and the porch situation? So I think that in my imagination, I always see these restricted, very unusual discussions that it has to do with that period of time. And then so they're on a boat, they had to go to Rome, maybe they had to make a plea to cause or something like that. And so they had to go on the boat, and the boat, it stops. The boat doesn't have wind every day. And sometimes the boat just doesn't get there anytime you expect it to. So then Rabbi Akiva says, well, we're going to make a sukkah anyhow. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, these are aristocrats. These are heads of communities. The only reason they're on this boat and not planning for sukkah is because it's some kind of dramatic crisis that they have.
Good point. Good point, Jeffrey. I like your insight. Very nice. Very, very, very well said, well established. Okay, Sei gesund, everyone.
Good day. Good day.
Thank you, Rabbi.